Imagine this. You are Marguerite, barely 19 years old, standing in a narrow stone chamber in the red light district of medieval Paris in the year 1347. The wooden door creaks shut behind you as your client removes his leather belt with deliberate slowness. His eyes hold a cruelty that makes your stomach turn, but you've learned to smile through the terror because resistance means death. Your hands shake as you light the single tallow candle that will provide the only illumination for what's about to happen. The flame flickers across stone walls, stained with substances you don't want to identify. Outside, you can hear the sounds of other women, like you, their muffled cries mixing with drunken laughter from the tavern below. What you don't realize yet is that surviving this encounter will require skills that have nothing to do with intimacy and everything to do with staying alive in a world designed to destroy you. Tonight, like every night, you'll need to become part actress, part physician, part warrior, and part magician, just to see another dawn. This isn't a story about romance or passion. This is the brutal reality of what medieval prostitutes actually did to survive their clients. A world where women developed techniques so desperate and ingenious that they would shock modern audiences into silence. Before we dive into these forgotten strategies of survival, if you're fascinated by the hidden truths of history, consider hitting that subscribe button. These buried voices deserve to be heard, and there are countless more stories waiting to be told from the shadows of the past. The medieval prostitute's survival toolkit began with reading clients before they even spoke a word. You learned to assess danger the moment a man's shadow fell across your doorway. His clothes told you his social class and how much violence he could commit without consequences. His gait revealed whether he was drunk enough to be unpredictable, but not so intoxicated that he couldn't pay. Most crucially, you watched his hands. Calloused palms meant a laborer who might be rough but straightforward. Soft hands suggested nobility, which meant greater danger because aristocrats faced no legal consequences for hurting you. Hands that trembled indicated either nervousness in a first-time client or the shaking of a man with diseases that could kill you. Your eyes had become instruments of survival, trained to notice details that meant the difference between earning coin and ending up in the river. A bulge under his tunic might be a purse full of silver, or it might be a knife. The way he positioned himself near the door told you whether he planned to pay or planned to take what he wanted by force. But the most important skill was reading the violence in a man's eyes. You learned to distinguish between the glassy stare of simple drunkenness and the focused intensity of someone planning to hurt you. Some men came seeking intimacy. Others came hunting for victims. Your survival depended on recognizing the difference within seconds of their arrival. The prostitutes of medieval Europe developed elaborate classification systems for their clients, categorizing men by the specific dangers they represented. The merchants were generally the safest, interested in quick transactions that wouldn't interfere with their business schedules. They paid fair rates and rarely caused trouble because scandal could destroy their trade relationships. Artisans and skilled workers occupied the middle ground. They had enough money to pay properly, but often came with frustrations from their daily lives that could turn violent. You learned to let these men talk about their problems, becoming part therapist to diffuse their anger before it could be directed at you. The clergy presented unique challenges. Priests and monks were supposed to be celibate, which made their presence in brothels both hypocritical and dangerous. They often demanded elaborate role-playing scenarios that mocked religious ceremonies, forcing you to participate in blasphemy that could result in charges of heresy if discovered. But it was the nobility that truly terrified experienced prostitutes. Lords and knights arrived knowing they could commit any violence without legal consequences. Your body was their property for the duration of their payment, and many interpreted this ownership as license for cruelty that would have been criminal if inflicted on citizens. The most dangerous clients were the young nobles, men barely out of adolescence who had never been told no, and saw prostitutes as opportunities to experiment with the most extreme forms of dominance. These clients often traveled in groups, turning your chamber into an arena for competitive cruelty, where each man tried to outdo his companions in creative violence. Soldiers presented their own category of risk. Men returning from campaigns brought battlefield brutality into intimate encounters, sometimes unable to distinguish between conquest and intimacy. They paid well, but often carried diseases from foreign lands and psychological damage that manifested as sudden explosions of violence. The techniques for managing dangerous clients began with controlling the physical environment of your workspace. Every experienced prostitute arranged her chamber as a fortress designed for rapid escape or defensive fighting. The bed was positioned to provide clear sightlines to the door and windows. Hidden weapons were placed within arm's reach at multiple locations throughout the room. Water basins served multiple purposes beyond hygiene. They could be thrown to temporarily blind an attacker or used to dilute blood if you were injured. The heavy ceramic pitchers doubled as weapons, and many prostitutes practiced precise strikes that could disable without killing, avoiding the legal consequences of murdering a client. Lighting was carefully controlled to create advantages. Candles were positioned to illuminate the client while keeping your own movements partially in shadow. This allowed you to watch for sudden movements while making it harder for aggressive clients to predict your reactions. The most sophisticated prostitutes created elaborate networks of safety signals with neighboring workers. Coded phrases called out during encounters could summon help from other women or friendly guards. Specific rhythms of knocking on walls warned others about particularly dangerous clients who should be avoided. Weapon concealment required both creativity and constant maintenance. Hairpins were sharpened into stilettos that could be driven into an attacker's neck or eyes. Jewelry was modified to include hidden blades or poisoned surfaces. Even cosmetics served defensive purposes, with powders that could temporarily blind or irritate an aggressor. The prostitute's pharmacological knowledge rivaled that of trained physicians, born from desperate necessity rather than formal education. You learned to identify and treat the countless diseases that clients brought to your chamber because medical care for women in your profession simply didn't exist. Mercury treatments for syphilis were crude and dangerous, but prostitutes developed techniques for applying these toxic remedies without killing themselves. They learned to recognize the early symptoms of various sexual diseases and created elaborate regimens for prevention and treatment using herbs, minerals, and other substances. Pain management became a specialized skill when violence was an occupational hazard. Prostitutes mixed their own remedies for broken bones, internal bleeding, and trauma. They learned basic surgery for treating knife wounds and developed techniques for stitching cuts that wouldn't leave obvious scars. The most valuable knowledge involved fertility control and pregnancy termination. Prostitutes maintained detailed records of which herbs and procedures could prevent conception or end unwanted pregnancies. This information was carefully guarded and passed down through informal networks of women who understood that pregnancy meant financial disaster or death. Poison detection was another survival skill, as some clients attempted to drug prostitutes for easier exploitation. You learned to recognize the taste and smell of various sedatives and developed techniques for secretly disposing of drugged wine or food. Some prostitutes carried antidotes for common poisons, while others induced vomiting as a general countermeasure. The psychological manipulation techniques employed by medieval prostitutes were sophisticated beyond anything taught in modern schools. You learned to become whatever fantasy your client required while maintaining enough psychological distance to preserve your sanity and assess threats. Experienced prostitutes could read a man's deepest insecurities within minutes of conversation and use that knowledge to control the encounter. A boastful merchant might be made to feel powerful through exaggerated admiration, keeping him docile and generous. A nervous young noble could be reassured and guided, preventing anxiety from turning into aggression. The art of deflecting violence through psychological manipulation required understanding the specific triggers that made each type of client dangerous. Religious men often felt guilty about their presence in brothels. and skilled prostitutes learned to absolve them through role-playing scenarios that justified their behavior. This prevented the self-loathing that sometimes exploded into violence against the women who represented their sin. Military clients required different approaches, often needing to feel like conquerors rather than customers. Prostitutes learned to provide the illusion of resistance followed by surrender, satisfying the soldier's need for dominance without triggering actual aggression. This delicate balance between submission and control required exceptional psychological insight. The most dangerous clients were those who came seeking not intimacy, but power through inflicting pain. Experienced prostitutes learned to identify these men and either refuse service or redirect their sadistic impulses toward objects rather than human flesh. This might involve providing them with items to destroy or rituals that satisfied their need for dominance without causing physical harm. Economic survival required constant negotiation between safety and profit. Refusing dangerous clients meant lost income, but accepting them could mean death. Prostitutes developed elaborate pricing systems that charge higher rates for dangerous activities, essentially pricing out the most threatening behaviors while maximizing income from safer encounters. Payment collection became an art form requiring timing, persuasion, and sometimes force. Many clients attempted to leave without paying, relying on the prostitute's lack of legal recourse. Experienced women learned to collect payment upfront whenever possible and developed techniques for extracting money from reluctant clients without triggering violence. The barter economy was often safer than cash transactions. Clients might pay with food, cloth, or other goods that had value, but couldn't be easily stolen by violent customers. Some prostitutes preferred these arrangements because goods could be hidden more easily than coins and were less likely to attract thieves. Credit arrangements with regular clients provided financial stability, but required careful management. Prostitutes maintained detailed mental records of who owed what, when payments were due, and what leverage they held over delinquent customers. This informal banking system operated entirely on reputation and intimidation. The most successful prostitutes understood that their real business was not sex but emotional labor. Men came to brothels seeking not just physical release, but connection, validation, and escape from their daily struggles. Women who provided these psychological services commanded higher rates and developed loyal clienteles that offered some protection. Listening skills were as valuable as physical beauty. Clients often paid premium rates simply to talk to someone who would listen without judgment. Prostitutes became repositories for secrets, confessions, and fears that men couldn't share with wives or friends. This emotional intimacy created bonds that sometimes protected women from violence. The role of confidant came with its own dangers. Knowing too much about powerful clients could be as lethal as knowing too little. Prostitutes learned to forget selectively, keeping enough information to ensure payment and loyalty, while avoiding knowledge that could make them targets for elimination. Performance became the foundation of survival, requiring prostitutes to maintain elaborate fictional personas that protected their true selves while satisfying client fantasies. You learn to become completely different people for different customers, shifting personality, accent, and behavior to match expectations. The construction of these personas required detailed backstories and consistent characterization. A prostitute might be an innocent country girl for one client and an experienced courtesan for another, requiring different vocabularies, mannerisms, and reactions. Maintaining these multiple identities prevented clients from knowing the real person behind the performance. Language skills provided significant advantages. Prostitutes who could speak multiple languages commanded higher rates and could serve diverse clienteles. More importantly, linguistic abilities allowed them to understand conversations between clients, gathering information that could be used for protection or profit. The most sophisticated prostitutes developed reputations for specific types of performance, becoming specialists who could charge premium rates for particular fantasies. This specialization reduced competition and created loyal customer bases, but it also required maintaining expert-level skills in complex psychological and physical performances. Pregnancy was a constant threat that could destroy a prostitute's livelihood and potentially her life. Medieval society offered no support for unmarried mothers, and bearing a child meant financial catastrophe. Prostitutes developed elaborate systems for preventing, detecting, and terminating pregnancies using knowledge that often exceeded that of trained physicians. The herbs and techniques used for birth control were dangerous and often ineffective, but they represented the only options available. Women shared information about plants like pennyroyal and tansy that could prevent conception or induce miscarriage, along with careful instructions about dosages that might work without causing death. When pregnancies occurred, despite preventive measures, prostitutes had limited options. Some continued working while hiding their condition, using specialized clothing and techniques to conceal expanding bellies. Others temporarily left the profession if they had resources to survive without income. The most tragic cases involved women who attempted dangerous procedures to terminate pregnancies, often dying from infection or blood loss. Those who survived childbirth faced impossible choices about what to do with infants they couldn't support. Many children were abandoned to foundling homes with astronomical mortality rates. Some prostitutes attempted to leave the profession when they became pregnant, seeking marriage or other forms of survival. However, their past made them unsuitable wives for most men, and few possessed skills for other types of work. These women often returned to prostitution after giving birth, sometimes bringing children into the brothel environment. Disease was another constant threat that required specialized knowledge and preventive measures. Prostitutes learned to recognize the symptoms of various sexually transmitted diseases and developed techniques for examination and basic treatment. This medical knowledge was shared through informal networks and passed down through generations of women. The treatments available were primitive and often dangerous, but they represented the only medical care accessible to women in the profession. Mercury treatments for syphilis could cure the disease, but often caused mercury poisoning. Herbal remedies for other conditions sometimes worked, but frequently proved ineffective or harmful. Prevention strategies included various barrier methods and chemical treatments applied before or after encounters with clients. These techniques were based on folk knowledge and experimentation rather than scientific understanding, but some proved surprisingly effective. The physical demands of the profession required prostitutes to maintain their health, despite constant exposure to disease and violence. They developed exercise routines and dietary practices designed to preserve their appearance and energy levels. Beauty was their primary economic asset, and maintaining it required constant effort and expense. Some women formed informal healthcare cooperatives, pooling resources to purchase medicines and sharing medical knowledge. These networks provided emotional support and practical assistance when individual prostitutes were too sick or injured to work. The most successful prostitutes understood that physical beauty alone was insufficient for long-term survival. They cultivated skills in conversation, music, dancing, and other forms of entertainment that could extend their careers beyond their youth. These cultural accomplishments allowed them to serve wealthier clienteles and command higher rates. Educational pursuits, even basic literacy, provided significant advantages in a largely illiterate society. Prostitutes who could read and write could manage their own financial affairs, maintain client records, and communicate with business partners. Some became informal bankers or information brokers, using their literacy as a foundation for more diverse business activities. Artistic skills like singing or playing musical instruments created additional revenue streams and made prostitutes more valuable to clients seeking sophisticated entertainment. These talents also provided entree to higher social circles where the most profitable clients could be found. The development of these skills required significant time and resource investment, often through relationships with clients who were willing to pay for education in exchange for exclusive access. These arrangements could provide financial stability, but also created dependencies that could become dangerous if the patron lost interest or died. Violence was an ever-present reality that required both preventive measures and response strategies. Prostitutes learned to fight effectively using available weapons and environmental advantages. They practiced techniques for disabling attackers quickly and escaping from dangerous situations. The legal system offered no protection for prostitutes, so they developed informal justice systems within their communities. Women who harmed clients faced no official consequences, but they had to deal with retaliation from the victims' associates. This created complex networks of alliances and feuds that shaped the social dynamics of red light districts. Some prostitutes formed relationships with guards, soldiers, or other men who could provide physical protection in exchange for sexual services or payment. These arrangements offered security but also created new dependencies and potential sources of danger if the protectors turned predatory. The most experienced prostitutes learned to project an aura of dangerousness that deterred some potential attackers. This might involve cultivating reputations for violence, displaying weapons openly, or associating with known criminals. The goal was to make attacking them seem more trouble than it was worth. Cooperation and competition among prostitutes created complex social dynamics within brothel communities. Women had to balance individual survival against collective security, sometimes working together against dangerous clients while competing for the safest and most profitable customers. Information sharing was crucial for survival. Prostitutes maintained informal networks that tracked dangerous clients, shared techniques for avoiding violence, and warned about law enforcement raids. These communication systems operated through coded languages and subtle signals that could convey vital information quickly. Territorial disputes were common, as women competed for the best locations and clienteles. These conflicts had to be managed carefully to avoid attracting unwanted attention from authorities or creating opportunities for external enemies to exploit divisions within the community. The most successful brothel communities developed hierarchical structures with experienced prostitutes mentoring newcomers and enforcing community standards. These systems provided some protection for vulnerable women while maintaining order that benefited everyone's business interests. Age and beauty determined a prostitute's position within these hierarchies. Younger, more attractive women commanded higher rates but also faced greater dangers from clients seeking to exploit their inexperience. Older women might earn less but often had knowledge and connections that provided different types of value. Economic cooperation included sharing resources, pooling money for bribes or protection, and creating informal insurance systems where women supported each other during times of illness or injury. These mutual aid societies operated outside legal frameworks, but provided essential support networks. The relationship between prostitutes and legal authorities was complex and constantly shifting. Law enforcement officials often demanded bribes or sexual services in exchange for overlooking illegal activities. These arrangements provided some protection, but also created new vulnerabilities and dependencies. Corruption was systemic, with judges, guards, and other officials regularly involved in the sex trade, either as clients or business partners. This meant that prostitutes had to navigate not just the dangers of their profession, but also the predatory behavior of those supposedly responsible for maintaining order. Some women developed relationships with powerful officials that provided protection from prosecution and competition. These arrangements required careful management because legal protection often came with exclusive sexual obligations that could limit earning potential from other clients. The periodic crackdowns on prostitution were often motivated more by political needs than moral concerns. Authorities might tolerate or even profit from the sex trade for years, then suddenly crack down to demonstrate piety or respond to public pressure. Prostitutes had to develop early warning systems and escape plans for these unpredictable enforcement campaigns. Religious authorities presented particular challenges. because their moral condemnation of prostitution existed alongside their frequent participation as clients. Prostitutes had to navigate the hypocrisy of serving priests and monks while facing religious persecution for their profession. The guild system that governed most medieval trades excluded prostitutes, leaving them without the economic protections and political representation that other workers enjoyed. This meant they had to create their own informal organizations to negotiate with authorities and manage business disputes. Some regions attempted to regulate prostitution through licensing systems that provided legal recognition in exchange for taxes and health inspections. These arrangements offered some protection, but also created new forms of control and exploitation by governmental authorities. The most sophisticated prostitutes learned to work within these systems while maintaining enough independence to protect their interests. This required understanding complex legal and political relationships and developing skills in negotiation and manipulation that rivaled those of trained diplomats. Marriage represented a potential escape from prostitution, but the social stigma attached to the profession made finding suitable husbands extremely difficult. Most men willing to marry former prostitutes were either desperate themselves or seeking to exploit women with limited options. Some prostitutes accumulated enough wealth to purchase their way into respectability through strategic marriages with men in debt or seeking social advancement. These arrangements required careful financial planning and often involved concealing past activities from new communities. The children of prostitutes faced severe social disadvantages that limited their opportunities for advancement. Sons might become criminals or laborers, while daughters often followed their mothers into the sex trade. Breaking these generational cycles required exceptional circumstances and resources. Retirement from prostitution was difficult because few women had been able to save sufficient money for independent survival, and their lack of other skills limited alternative employment options. Many continued working until age or illness made it impossible, then faced destitution or death. The most successful prostitutes invested their earnings in property, businesses, or other ventures that could provide income after their physical attractiveness faded. These investments required business acumen and connections that few women in the profession possessed. Some former prostitutes became brothel keepers or daddams, using their experience and connections to manage other women. These positions offered financial stability and social status within their communities, but they also involved exploiting younger women entering the profession. Religious conversion offered another potential path to respectability, with some prostitutes joining convents or becoming involved in charitable activities. However, their past often followed them, and genuine acceptance by religious communities was rare. The psychological toll of prostitution required developing mental strategies for survival that often lasted long after women left the profession. The constant threat of violence, sexual exploitation, and social condemnation created trauma that manifested in various ways throughout their lives. Emotional detachment was a necessary survival skill that allowed women to endure degrading treatment while preserving some sense of self. This psychological armor, while essential for survival, often made it difficult to form genuine relationships or experience normal emotional connections. Many prostitutes developed substance abuse problems as a way of coping with the psychological demands of their work. Alcohol and primitive drugs provided temporary escape from their circumstances, but often created additional health problems and dependencies. The most resilient women found ways to maintain hope and personal identity despite their circumstances. This might involve maintaining connections with family members, pursuing creative outlets, or developing spiritual practices that provided meaning beyond their immediate survival needs. Mental illness was common among prostitutes, manifesting as depression, anxiety, and various forms of psychological breakdown. The stigma attached to both mental illness and prostitution meant that these women received no treatment or support, often leading to early death or complete social marginalization. The support networks that developed among prostitutes provided crucial emotional assistance that helped many women survive psychologically. These relationships often became the most meaningful connections in women's lives, creating chosen families that replaced biological families who had rejected them. The transfer of knowledge between generations of prostitutes ensured that survival strategies were preserved and refined over time. Older women served as mentors, teachers, and protectors for newcomers, passing down techniques that had been developed through years of dangerous experience. This oral tradition included not just practical skills, but also cultural knowledge about how to navigate the complex social dynamics of medieval society. Prostitutes often had unique insights into human nature and social relationships that came from their position as outsiders, observing society from its margins. The stories and legends that developed within prostitute communities served both entertainment and educational purposes. These narratives preserved information about successful survival strategies while providing cautionary tales about the consequences of poor decisions. Some prostitutes developed reputations that transcended their immediate communities, becoming legendary figures whose stories influenced how the profession was perceived and practiced. These women often achieved a form of social status that was unique in medieval society. The cultural impact of prostitution extended far beyond the red light districts where it was practiced. Prostitutes influenced fashion, language, and social customs in ways that shaped broader medieval culture. Their position as both insiders and outsiders gave them unique perspectives that influenced artistic and intellectual developments. Literature and art from the medieval period reflect the complex relationship between society and prostitution, with prostitutes appearing as both villains and heroes in various narratives. These cultural representations shaped public attitudes and influenced how real women in the profession were treated. The economic impact of prostitution was significant enough to influence urban development and commercial relationships. Red light districts generated substantial revenue for cities through taxes, bribes, and the economic activity they attracted. This economic importance provided some protection for the women involved, as authorities recognized their value to local economies. Trade relationships often involved prostitutes as either direct participants or facilitators. Merchants and traders frequently used brothels as places to conduct business, make contacts, and gather information. This gave some prostitutes access to commercial opportunities and valuable intelligence about market conditions. The medical knowledge developed by prostitutes contributed to broader understanding of human sexuality, disease, and anatomy. Their practical experience with sexual health issues often exceeded that of trained physicians, and some of their techniques and remedies were eventually adopted by mainstream medicine. Scientific understanding of reproduction and sexual health advanced partly through the empirical observations of prostitutes who had direct experience with these phenomena. Their knowledge was rarely formally recognized, but it influenced medical practice through informal channels. The legal innovations developed to regulate prostitution influenced broader legal concepts about personal autonomy, property rights, and social control. The complex relationships between law, morality, and economic necessity that surrounded prostitution contributed to evolving legal philosophies. Political relationships were often mediated through connections to the sex trade, with prostitutes serving as intermediaries, information sources, and influencers in various political machinations. Their access to powerful clients gave some women unusual political influence. The international character of medieval prostitution, with women and clients traveling across political boundaries, contributed to cultural exchange and the spread of ideas, languages, and customs. Brothels often served as informal diplomatic venues where representatives of different cultures met and negotiated. Military campaigns relied partly on the services provided by prostitutes who followed armies and established temporary brothels near military encampments. These women provided not just sexual services but also medical care, information gathering, and other support functions that were essential to military operations. The religious implications of prostitution extended beyond simple moral condemnation to influence theological debates about sin, redemption, and the nature of human sexuality. The presence of prostitutes in medieval society forced religious authorities to grapple with complex questions about mercy, justice, and social responsibility. Charitable organizations sometimes developed specifically to assist prostitutes seeking to leave the profession, creating new forms of social welfare that influenced broader approaches to helping marginalized populations. These early social services provided models for later welfare systems. The technological innovations developed by prostitutes for their survival and business needs included improvements in contraception, medical treatment, security systems, and communication methods. Many of these innovations eventually found applications in broader society. Urban planning and architecture were influenced by the need to accommodate prostitution while maintaining social order. The design of red light districts and the integration of brothels into city layouts required solving complex problems about privacy, security, and public access. As we reach the end of this journey into one of history's most brutal professions, we must confront uncomfortable truths about survival, exploitation, and human resilience. The women who worked as prostitutes in medieval Europe faced dangers that would overwhelm most modern people, yet they developed strategies for survival that demonstrated extraordinary ingenuity and determination. Their techniques for reading clients, managing violence, treating disease, and building supportive communities reveal a level of sophistication that challenges stereotypes about medieval knowledge and capabilities. These women were not passive victims, but active agents who created systems for protecting themselves and others in their profession. The psychological strength required to maintain hope and humanity while facing constant dehumanization speaks to the remarkable resilience of the human spirit. These women found ways to preserve their dignity and create meaning in circumstances designed to destroy both. Their contributions to medical knowledge, legal innovation, and social understanding were rarely acknowledged, but significantly influenced medieval society. The survival strategies they developed provided foundations for later advances in women's rights, healthcare, and social services. The economic and political influence wielded by some prostitutes demonstrates that even society's most marginalized members could find ways to exercise power and influence. Their ability to navigate complex social hierarchies while maintaining their independence required skills that would be valued in any era. The networks of mutual support and knowledge sharing created by prostitutes provided models for collective action that influenced later social movements. Their understanding of how to organize and protect vulnerable populations contributed to evolving concepts of social solidarity. Today, as we grapple with ongoing issues of sexual exploitation, human trafficking, and the marginalization of sex workers, the medieval experience provides important lessons about the relationship between social stigma and personal safety. The strategies developed by medieval prostitutes for survival and resistance remain relevant for understanding contemporary challenges. The historical record of medieval prostitution reminds us that survival in hostile environments requires not just individual strength, but also collective action and mutual support. The women who created these survival networks demonstrated that even the most powerless members of society could find ways to protect themselves and others. Their stories serve as testimony to human adaptability and the refusal to accept victimization as inevitable. In circumstances where society offered no protection, these women created their own systems of safety and support that enabled many to survive and some to thrive. The complexity of medieval prostitution challenges simple narratives about oppression and agency, revealing instead a nuanced reality where women exercised whatever power they could claim, while navigating systems designed to exploit them. Their experiences provide insights into how marginalized people create strategies for survival and resistance. Understanding this history helps us recognize that the challenges faced by sex workers are not new but represent ongoing struggles for safety, dignity, and autonomy. The medieval experience demonstrates both the persistence of these challenges and the human capacity to develop creative solutions for survival. The legacy of medieval prostitutes extends beyond their immediate historical context to influence how we understand gender, sexuality, power, and survival. Their stories remind us that even in history's darkest corners, human ingenuity and solidarity can create possibilities for resistance and survival. As we face contemporary challenges around sexual exploitation and women's safety, the medieval experience provides both sobering reminders about the persistence of these problems and inspiring examples of how marginalized people can create systems for mutual protection and support. The voices of medieval prostitutes, though often silenced by historical record, speak across centuries to remind us that survival requires not just individual courage, but also collective action and mutual aid. Their strategies for protecting themselves and others provide timeless lessons about human resilience and social solidarity. If this exploration into the hidden strategies of survival has opened your eyes to the complexity of medieval life, subscribe to continue this journey through history's shadows. There are countless more stories of human courage and ingenuity waiting to be discovered in the archives of the past. These women's experiences remind us that even in the most hostile circumstances, people find ways to create community, preserve dignity, and resist dehumanization. Their legacy challenges us to recognize the humanity and agency of those society attempts to marginalize and to learn from their strategies for survival and resistance. The medieval prostitute story is ultimately one of human endurance and ingenuity in the face of overwhelming odds. Their techniques for survival, their networks of mutual support, and their refusal to accept victimization as inevitable provide powerful examples of how marginalized people can create possibilities for safety and dignity, even in the most hostile environments. Remember their courage as you face your own challenges, knowing that the human capacity for survival, solidarity, and resistance has been tested throughout history and has never been found wanting. Click that subscribe button to ensure these forgotten testimonies reach others who seek to understand the full spectrum of human experience under extreme circumstances. There are countless more stories buried in history's archives, waiting for someone willing to examine how people survived when survival seemed impossible. These voices deserve to be heard, not because their methods were admirable, but because their determination was remarkable.